Okay, my friends, we're going to go back and talk about Ted Arcidi, which we did have a video a while back about, and I'll show the picture of that video. But from Ted Arcidi, first guy to do over 700, which he did in '85 at the Hawaii Record Breakers. But interestingly, this is a routine that he learned from Chuck Sipes, who was obviously just a great bodybuilder. He may have done some powerlifting contests, but he was a bodybuilder primarily, but a very strong bodybuilder, and especially in the bench press. And as you can see by his chest, shoulders, and triceps were really awesome in particular. Anywho, and this is just a picture of that first video that I posted. Ted Arcidi's Road to the 705 Bench, which you can go back in the archives and check that out. Also, a pretty good video. But that was not talking about tendon and ligament strength, which this one is going to focus on. Back in '78, talks about in college in Massachusetts, he didn't had little or no knowledge of the human body, but was really interested in developing power and muscle mass. Nothing more than I wanted to do to be powerful. Didn't care how I looked. I cared about how much I could lift, which was much more important to me than putting an extra 16th of an inch on my biceps. Now there he is, and that was after the Hawaii Record Breakers meet, where he did indeed do the 705. And yes, he had a bench shirt. Which we talked about that another gentleman, Hollywood Henderson, did 700 without a bench shirt. So he's the first to do that. So I found a good book on anatomy, kinesiology, etc. And he talks about that arm size is a contributor, but and he, yeah, obviously muscle size is something, but he was more interested in superpower, and he knew that his program was working because he made gains of as much as 100 pounds on the bench press in a year. Now here he is as he later went into professional wrestling, as a lot of, not a lot, but a fair amount of powerlifters do, because there's really not much money in powerlifting. Few guys, make some money in other parts of it. So he talks about Canadian Colossus Doug Hepburn, who we see right here, and he's doing curls with 2 1/4, which we'll also see Casey Viator doing at one point in this video. Um, but he goes on to talk about several other guys that were, the bench kings back in those days. And of course, Marvin Eder, Pat Casey, Chuck Sipes, Jim Williams. Hepburn was benching 560, way back. There's Marvin, and he did a 500-pound bench weighing about 200 pounds. There's Jim Williams. He ended up doing an unofficial 700 at a York meet. But then he's talking about again, Casey was the first guy to crash the 600-pound barrier. And there he is with those huge dumbbells. And him and that was at the time when Sipes was actually trying to get to 600, but he only ever got to 570, which is still at his weight very phenomenal. So some of the above lifts may not seem like much compared to today's standards, but remember, these guys weren't really juiced up, or certainly at least not to the extent that they got to be in the 80s. So he goes on to talk about the truth about tendons and ligaments. So a tendon is a sort of a tough cord, strap-like tissue that connects to between the muscle and the bone. And there you can see the muscle at the top and the tendon at the bottom. So it connects the muscle to the bone, and obviously is very important in any sort of lifting situation that you're going to find yourself in. Tendons and ligaments have a relatively poor blood supply compared to skeletal muscles, and there are a few self proclaimed muscle experts who recommend high volume training of 5 to 10 sets of 10 to 20 reps on 2 or 3 exercises per muscle group. They theorize that constant repetitive action, which adds up to 20 or 30 sets of body parts, stimulates tendon and ligament strength and growth to the greater workload, etc. And he says basically these people are from Pluto. This is nonsense. And I have seen that theory propounded by people. On the other hand, about the only thing that type of training will do is develop what I call a suck pump. Only lasts a few hours, and sure, the muscles might get to a seemingly huge size, but they'll usually do so without a corresponding increase in strength. Big muscles do not always indicate great strength. Granted, a muscle can be a real power dynamo, and the bigger the better for strength potential, but the critical factor is that you also have the strength of the tendons and ligaments along with your muscles. And he talks about doing supports, among other things. So, supports and partials. And here's a guy with, looks like he's doing a support with a pretty massive weight there. Seemingly massive muscle is largely ineffective unless its tendons and ligaments have been equally strengthened. So we go into, and he talks about here Chuck Sipes, which observed on many occasions that tendon and ligament strength is more important than just plain body weight for strength and power. And it was his experience that there was three phases of development for those, which would be strengthening movements, isometric, concentrated, sustained movements, and partials. Another guy that really liked partials was this gentleman here. And here you see him. I'm not sure if he was doing a support with that huge weight or maybe doing some quarter squats, but Paul Anderson did like those. Chuck was right on and realized some time ago that to obtain real power, I had to specialize on exercises that build greater tendon and ligament strength. Uh, and accomplish this, and you want to hit the groups like the biggies, like thighs, back, pecs, and shoulders. Uh, Powerlifters seeking to develop greater power need to concentrate, especially in the tendons and ligaments, and work on those muscle groups in particular. And the basic idea is to train muscles over a short range of movement, doing half and quarter squats and deadlifts. Here we see Wilbur Miller, I believe this is, with a 1,000 pound, just a very short lift. Even just holding 1,000 pounds, is phenomenal. It has been my experience that the human body cannot fail to respond to the stimulus of the short range and limited motion principles. Even so, if you don't train, if you train at home or don't have the right equipment, of course, he had his own power rack, which I wasn't even aware of. But in essence, a power rack is a power rack. And the accompanying routine and strict instructions for the bench press also applied to the standing behind the neck barbell press. I found that as my power improved in the bench, it became much easier to perform behind the neck barbell presses with greatly increased weight. Now there's Bill March, and there was a routine that they did at York where it was all about this new isometric rack that they had built, and they were saying how wonderful it was. Meanwhile, Bill was also one of the first people experimenting with D-ball, which had just came out. So, anywho, uh, so he's talking about when he lays on his back with his arms and shoulders can move. He's talking about the comparison between doing a bench press and doing a behind the neck press. Obviously a lot of pressure on the arms and shoulders, which can be intense on the bench press, whereas um, his entire body is supported basically on his ankles. And so it's a little harder to build dynamic shoulder power with the behind the neck press, but it does work ultimately. And he talks about learning something from John Grimmick, shown here. And John was talking about how he was struggling with the overhead press, and um, only intensive concentration on the bench press helped him to increase the weight on the overhead presses ultimately. Final notes: the key to fantastic sinew power in the tendons and ligaments is to use the partial and support movements in your day to day workouts with the rep schemes that I've listed. I advocate keeping the reps at around 6. They're great because you can build endurance and strength at the same time. And although you're not using extremely heavy poundage on this routine, you still have some pretty hefty weights to use. And there's another picture of John from back in the day, and that was 67. And there he is with Abby Stockton, obviously. Um, but John was always a strong guy. Low reps and heavy poundage are the keys to a foolproof system of building greater tendon and ligament strength and ultimately great power. So here's the routine. Monday, light flat bench presses, 4 sets of 5. When he says light, he means take something that you could do for 9 or 10 reps, but only do 5. Then you do your partials. So 3 sets of 6 where you're using a power rack. And he says, so you're basically each week you're changing where you're locking out from and you move. And here's the old school. That's Bill West here doing, and you can see kind of how he has it set up there. Where the pins are is where you're pushing off from. So in every 2 weeks or so, you lower the starting point so that bar is going to move down. Um, or you could go the other way where you're starting, just off your chest and moving the bar up. But he suggests starting, with like 6 inches from the top and doing your sets there, and then next week moving down to 12 inches, then to 18 inches, then to 24 over the course of those 4 weeks. And then he talks about doing lying tricep extensions on that same day too. But this was from an article, and this was in my book about the original West Side guys. And they were big believers in lockout prones, also known as the bench press, build great power. So then he talks about doing the partial lying tricep extensions, where again, you set up the power rack so that you're doing the extension from, like starting out just a few inches below the lockout point, and then you can move it down. Um, and then he talks about alternating your grip. So you work all 3 aspects of the triceps, which, again, there's several people talk about changing the grip. Now, this is from an old school Charles Smith Power Rack triceps article, but he's showing where you can set up to do partials, like the old French press standing, or you can do it, behind the back, or you can do it lying, whatever. But it's just a matter of changing the position of the starting point of the barbell. Then he talks about doing barbell curls for 3 sets of 6 with an easy curl bar and maximum weight. And then on Tuesday, goes into doing lat pull downs for 4 sets of 10, which is a great movement for developing a thick back and strong base for benching big. Alternate formats, again, performing one in front and one behind. Here, as I mentioned before, is Casey Viator doing some just massive curls there with 2 1/4. And I don't think it's super strict, but, still. Wednesday, complete rest and recuperation. And then on Thursday, we go back into bench presses, but heavy flat bench presses. If you recall, on Monday there was light bench presses, and then he did the partials. So you're going 4 sets of 6, and then gradually 4 sets of 5, 3 sets of 3, 2 sets of 3, and week 10 is you're going for your max attempt. So again, this is just regular heavy flat bench presses, starting out with 6s and working your way down to a max single. Here's a picture of good old Jim Williams, which he mentioned before, one of the great benchers ever, and doing 5 1/4 for 10 reps, which is just insane. So then after you do your heavy benches, you do your heavy flat supports, which you hold for 4 times 20 seconds. And you do 20 to 40% more than your best maximum single effort. And the idea is to support that massive weight at arm's length with a very slight, at most, elbow bend for 5 to 20 seconds. When you can hold that weight for 4 sets of 20, it's time to add more weight. And then he goes into lying tricep extensions, and you can go back and check out the rest of that panel. This is another way of doing. If you don't have a power rack and you want to do this at home, you can lie on your back and put the weight on boxes like that at any position you choose. Then he talks about doing partial behind the neck presses. Another fine tendon and ligament movement for the triceps and shoulder girdle. Use a weight that's 10 to 20 pounds under your best full range. Adjust the height of the power rack so that it clears the top of your head. And he does all his overhead presses while standing. On the first set, use your normal grip width and then press the weight out to arm's length, then lower and repeat for the required reps. And then you go on to do a couple more sets with different hand spacing. Now, here he is attacking 325, and again, he does it standing, so it kind of looks like he's getting ready to go do a squat, but no, he's getting ready to do a behind the neck press, and there he is doing it. And he eventually got up to like 375 for reps with that move. If you find it difficult to get the required reps with the suggested hand spacing, take some weight off the bar rather than changing the grip. Then he talks about doing barbell curls again. Use 20 pounds less than you used on Monday. And then, so do partial power curls for 2 sets of 6 to 10 with a straight bar. So basically adjust the height of the bar, the catches in the power rack, so that you can have the bar just about in this position that we're seeing with Doug here, where it's almost to lockout but not quite, and you take that heavy weight and you just just pull it off the catches and hold it there, which he'll talk about in this next panel. You could kind of do it without the rack and just hold it at the top like that, but that's a little awkward. Hold the partial contraction at the top of the movement for 2 seconds or more. And within a few workouts, you should see at least a 5 to 10 pound improvement in your full range curls. Then on Friday, he says repeat the Tuesday workout. And on Saturday, he does squats for 3 sets of 6. And these are just regular old school squats. Jump 40 pounds over the weight you'd use for 3 sets of 10 and go for 3 sets of 6. Again, he likes the sixes. You might want to put on some knee wraps because of the stress that squats put on the knees. Here's another guy that obviously liked doing heavy squats, and he did believe in not just doing partials in a workout. He liked to mix the partials with the full squats. Anyhow, so then he goes and talks about quarter squats for 3 sets of 6. Every other workout, alternating with supports, and use about 50 pounds more than you would on your regular squats to begin with, and only would do a quarter of the way down. Don't lock your knees. And then heavy supports for 4 sets of 10, where you're basically just holding a massive weight, doing kind of like a walkout and holding it there. And again, here's Paul with that big giant weight, which I have to imagine he's doing like quarter squats with this weight. Obviously, he's not doing full. You can see where the rest sit. And then on Sunday, he says complete rest and recuperation. So you're only, your workout days are really only 4 days in this routine. And then here's another way. Again, this is Bill West and crew to do partial deadlifts without even a rack, and they did that quite a bit, where they just had those boxes that they pulled the weight off of. So that's about it for the tendon and ligament routine from Ted. I thank you for watching. Please hit those likes if you do like the video. If you haven't subscribed yet, I would appreciate it if you did, and that way you'll get updates when I pop a new video. So that's about it. Thanks, and I'm out.